Hello listeners, welcome back to another episode of Jack Spits Nothing But Facts. As I stated in the last episode, today we'll be looking into the rumor that Beatle Paul McCartney is actually dead. So in Liverpool in 1960, one of the most influential bands of the era was formed, the Beatles. The Beatles consisted of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. Today, the group is known as the best-selling music artists in the United States, and in 1984 they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Sadly, John Lennon was assassinated in 1980 and George Harrison died of lung cancer in 2011. The last two remaining Beatles are Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney. Or maybe not. On November 9th, 1967, the car belonging to Paul McCartney got into a car crash, and consequently, a few newspapers reported that he died. In actuality, Paul McCartney was never even in the car when it crashed because he was at a party in Sussex. The person driving the car was a student named Muhammad Haji, who was using the car to bring drugs to the party that Paul McCartney was at. Naturally, a few rumors stating that Paul was dead began to spread, but they didn't make it too far. One thing that really secured this rumor was a song released in 1969 by Terry Knight named St. Paul. Some people believe that this song hinted at the death of Paul McCartney, but it's most likely that the song was about how Knight believed that the Beatles would soon break up. Either way, we can't really make any conclusions based off of this because the lyrics are really cryptid and it could have been interpreted as a ton of different things. The first actual mention of the rumor was in a student newspaper at Drake University in 1969. The newspaper article was titled, "Is Beatle Paul McCartney Dead?" The article did not receive much attention, but later, something happened which really ignited the rumor. On October 12th of that year, a DJ of a Detroit radio station took a call from a college student named Tom Zarsky. Zarsky told the DJ everything about the Paul is Dead rumor and, as proof, told them to play Revolution No. 9 from the Beatles' White Album backwards. The DJ did so and was very clearly able to hear the words, "Turn me on, dead man."
Turn me on, dead man. 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 Turn me on, dead man.
Now, normally when you hear about people talking about hidden messages in songs, the messages are very difficult to hear and I would have never known what the message was unless I was told. But for this one, I think you would agree that it's very clear what it sounds like, which is, "Turn me on, dead man." This is where the rumor really took off, and ever since it did, fans have been finding a bunch of signs that they believe indicate the death of Paul McCartney. Essentially, people believe that Paul McCartney died in the car crash on November 9th, but was replaced by the winner of a Paul McCartney look-alike contest named William Campbell in order to save the career and not break the hearts of fans. In addition to what was already said, there are also more clues present. A couple clues were seen on the Beatles' 8th studio album cover. One of the first things that people have pointed out about this cover is how the floral arrangement seems to be that of a funeral. They also note that in the bottom right corner, the flowers are in the form of a left-handed bass guitar, which is the instrument that Paul played. People also note that the flowers spell out Beatles, but the flowers at the end seem to spell out O, so together it would spell out Biatlaso, which is the name of a Greek island that they supposedly bought. Some people speculate that this is the Beatles inviting fans to discover the death of Paul at the island. These points are pretty weak in my opinion, but if you look closely at the ragdoll on the cover, you can also see a toy Aston Martin convertible, which is the car that Paul supposedly died in. Another clue which seems kinda cool, but is also a stretch, has to do with the drum in the center that says Lonely Hearts. If you bisect the Lonely Hearts, you get the phrase, I won, IX, he die. If I1 is 11 and IX is the Roman numeral number for 9, then you could possibly decode this as 11-9, he die, which would mean on November 9th, he died, which was the day that the car crash happened. One of the final hints on the cover is someone raising their hand behind Paul, which in some religions is a symbol of death. Or this guy could just be waving. There's also a few things that people have noticed about the Beatles' 9th album. One of the images on the poster inside the album shows Paul McCartney laying in a tub of water. Some people think that this looks like a decapitated head floating in blood. In addition, the song Glass Onion contains the lyrics, "looking through a glass onion." According to the DJ that I mentioned earlier, the term glass onion was British slang for the handle of a casket because in the 19th century, caskets had glass handles that looked like glass onions. Apparently, Paul is looking through this because, well, he's dead. Finally, the cover of the Abbey Road album has been analyzed by supporters of the Paul is dead theory. So, in this picture, Paul is holding a cigarette with his right hand, even though he was left-handed. so this might indicate that the person in the picture is in fact not the real Paul. Lastly, the picture was supposedly taken where the car crash happened. So here's what I think of all this. I'm almost certain that Paul is not dead yet. I don't think the evidence is convincing enough, and there's a lot of things that just don't make sense or are just flat out false. If Paul actually did die and the Beatles were covering up his death, then why would they give us hints? That seems really counterproductive. Also, as I said earlier, some people think that Paul was replaced by someone named William Campbell, who won a Paul McCartney lookalike contest in Edinburgh. The funny thing is, I can't find anything about a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, nor can I find anything about a person named William Campbell who won said contest. Let's just say that this is true for a second and say that someone named William Campbell did replace Paul. Then, when William dies, who would the funeral be for? William or Paul? That would have to cause some issues. And lastly, it's a bit strange that the lookalike would have the same exact voice as Paul, and if simple logic isn't enough, there's some evidence that the Paul's dead theory supporters have discovered that is simply false. They mentioned how in the Magic Mystery Tour cover, Paul is wearing a walrus suit. This is apparently significant because walrus means corpse in Greek. I don't know who made this up, but it's absurd. Walrus does not mean corpse in Greek. Some people also believe that at the end of Strawberry Fields, you can hear John Lennon saying, "I buried Paul," while in reality he's saying cranberry sauce. Finally, people say that in the Abbey Road cover, it is significant that Paul is barefoot because people in Italy are buried barefoot. First of all, I don't see how Italian culture has any significance to this, and second, I'm not able to find anything at all about Italians specifically being buried barefoot. People have even gone as far as saying that in the picture there's a cemetery to the left, and that is just a blatant lie. Although there might have been one or two subtle things at the beginning that could have led some people to believe that Paul is dead, there really isn't anything left that could lead anyone to believing that he is seriously dead. The rumor is interesting to look into, but that's all it is, a rumor. Thank you for listening, and feel free to join me next week when we look into why Elvis might have not died on the toilet after all.